My brother didn't even look sorry when he said it. He was leaning against the doorframe of my studio, arms crossed, wearing that half smile he's had since we were kids. The one that means he's already decided and he's just waiting for you to catch up. Meredith thinks this space would be perfect for her practice, he said. You've been struggling anyway. This is actually good for you. Behind him, through the floor-to-ceiling windows I'd spent 4 months negotiating into the lease, I could see my lighting rig still set up from the shoot 2 days before. A mood board I'd been building for 6 weeks was pinned across the entire north wall. My camera bags were stacked by the door. My sister-in-law, Meredith, was already walking the perimeter of the room with her phone out, taking measurements. I didn't say anything. I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and I thought, there it is. There's the thing I've been waiting for my whole life to finally show its face. I said, let me think about it, and I walked out. To understand why I didn't scream, why I didn't grab his arm and throw him out of a space I'd signed a lease on, I have to explain something about my family first. I am 31 years old. For 28 of those years, my brother DX has been the one thing my parents pointed to when they wanted to feel like they'd done something right. He's 4 years older than me, good-looking in a forgettable way, and he has always landed on his feet. Not because of anything he built, but because our parents were there to catch him every single time. When Dex failed out of his first college, my parents paid for a second one, no questions. When his first business, a premium car detailing experience, his words went under after 8 months. My father quietly absorbed the $22,000 in debt so it wouldn't touch Dex's credit. When Dex met Meredith and decided she needed a wellness practice, my mother gave them $30,000 as a wedding gift that everyone understood was seed money. I watched all of it happen. I took out student loans for the art program they said was impractical. I waited tables 4 nights a week to buy my first camera. I learned lighting from YouTube tutorials at midnight. I built my client list from zero, corporate headshots first, then editorial, then the brand work that actually started paying real money. When I signed the lease on the studio on Harrow Street 2 years ago, my mother said it was ambitious. My father said he hoped I'd budgeted carefully. Neither of them came to see it. Dex came once. He stood in the middle of the room, looked up at the skylights, and said, "Nice space." Then he asked if I could do headshots for Meredith's practice website for free. So when he showed up that Thursday afternoon and told me Meredith had decided she wanted my studio for her therapy practice, that she needed a calm, light-filled environment, and that my lease was up for renewal in 60 days anyway, I was not surprised. I was not even particularly angry. I was something colder than angry. I was done. The math had always been simple. I was the one who was supposed to absorb the impact so the rest of them could keep moving. And now they had looked at the thing I'd spent 2 years building, the most stable and real thing I'd ever made, and decided it was just a location they could slide into. Meredith's vision, apparently, was organic and airy. She wanted to gut the lighting infrastructure I'd installed, $14,000 worth of equipment, track systems, diffusion panels, and replace it with natural wellness elements. She wanted to remove the custom sound dampening wall I'd had built on the east side to block street noise. She wanted to put in a reception desk where my backdrop storage currently sat. She described all of this to me over the phone 2 days after Dex's visit, in the tone of someone explaining a schedule change, not a demolition. "I know it's a lot," she said, "but the bones of the space are really what we're paying for. The rest is just your stuff. Your stuff. 2 years of careful, expensive, deliberate build-out. Just my stuff." I told her I'd be in touch. Then I sat in my car in the parking garage under my building for a long time. My first instinct was to call my lawyer immediately. Go scorched earth, make it loud and public and ugly. Tell my parents exactly what Dex and Meredith had asked me to do. Force a confrontation. Defend my ground. But here's the thing about my family. In every confrontation we've ever had, I have been the difficult one. When I pushed back on Dex borrowing my car and returning it with a dent he never mentioned, I was making it a whole thing. When I asked my parents why they'd never once offered to help me with my student loans the way they'd absorbed Dex's business debt, my mother cried and my father told me I was poisoning the family with comparison. I was 24. I apologized. If I called them now and said your son is trying to take my business, the story would become Dex is just trying to support his wife's dreams, and I was being territorial and selfish and unable to share. So I didn't call. I thought about what my old mentor, a commercial photographer named Roz, who'd been in the industry for 30 years, had told me once when I was complaining about a client who kept trying to renegotiate after work was delivered. "Don't chase people into corners," she said. "Give them a door, make the door look good, and let them walk through it themselves." They usually don't notice the floor's not there until after. Dex and Meredith wanted my studio. Fine. I was gonna give it to them. Just not the way they thought. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the lease document and read it the way I hadn't read it since I'd first signed it. Slowly, clause by clause. Then I pulled up the city's commercial tenancy modification ordinances and the building's own alteration policy, which was publicly filed because the building was listed on the local historic preservation register. It wasn't a dramatic designation, not a national landmark, but it was enough. Any structural modification to the interior required a permit from the city's Office of Historic Preservation, a licensed contractor filing, and landlord approval in writing. The east wall I'd had sound dampened was original to the building, 1920s brick. The ceiling track system was anchored into original timber joists. Meredith's organic renovation vision was going to require permits she had no idea she needed, a contractor she hadn't hired, and approval from a landlord who had not been consulted. I called my landlord, Terrence, the next morning. I told him I was considering not renewing my lease and that another tenant, my sister-in-law, might be approaching him about taking the space. I told him, in friendly, helpful terms, that she was planning some modifications and that I wanted to make sure he was aware she'd need to go through the preservation office for anything structural. Terrence was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What kind of modifications?" I told him what Meredith had described to me. The wall removal, the lighting infrastructure tear-out, the entry reconfiguration. "She hasn't contacted me about any of this," he said. "I know," I said. "I just wanted to make sure the right information was out there before anything moved forward." I was friendly. I was helpful. I gave no indication that I was anything other than a departing tenant trying to be responsible. Then I started working on the document. I want to be clear, I didn't trick anyone into anything illegal. What I did was draft a sublease assignment agreement, a document that looked, on its surface, like I was agreeing to hand over my lease to Meredith 6 weeks before my renewal date, smoothing the transition. It was professionally formatted. It looked like a favor. At the top, I included a straightforward cash incentive. Upon execution of the agreement, I would release $8,000 in prepaid utilities and deposit credit back to the incoming tenant. Meredith had been asking me, through Dex, whether I'd be willing to leave the equipment behind as part of a goodwill transfer. I let her believe the $8,000 was connected to that. A soft way of saying yes, we're being generous, sign here and the money moves. What the document also contained, in the standard language of a commercial sublease assignment, was a clause stating that the incoming tenant assumed full responsibility for the condition of the space as modified, including any alterations made during their tenancy or during any pre-tenancy access period granted by the outgoing tenant. And in the indemnification section, the guarantors Dex had insisted on being listed as co-signatory, so the lease would count toward his credit profile, which his loan broker had apparently recommended. Agreed to hold the landlord and the previous leaseholder harmless for any code violations or unauthorized modifications arising from the assignment period. I sent it to Meredith on a Tuesday evening with a short message. "I've thought it over. I think this could work for both of us. The deposit credit is outlined in Section 2. I know you were hoping for something to offset startup costs. Let me know if you have questions." I did not follow up. I waited. My phone rang at 9:37 the next morning. It was Dex. "We're good," he said. I could hear the smile in his voice. "Meredith signed." I signed. "We're going to make this work, I think. I know it's been weird." "It's fine," I said. "You're going to love what she does with it." "I'm sure," I said. There was a pause. "You okay?" "Completely," I said. I got off the phone and sat very still for a moment. Then I booked 3 weeks of shooting time at a colleague's studio space in the east part of the city. I moved my most essential equipment out of Harrow Street over the following 4 days, job by job, without announcing anything. I told my regular clients I was doing a facility transition and that all bookings would continue uninterrupted. Most of them didn't care where the work happened as long as I showed up. On the day Meredith got her keys, 2 weeks before my formal lease end date because Dex had asked if they could start just planning and measuring, and I had said yes and writing, she posted a video to her Instagram. She was standing in the middle of my studio in workout clothes, turning in a slow circle, her arms out wide. "Claiming the space," the caption said. "Healing starts here." Over the next 2 weeks, she posted 11 more videos. She walked her contractor through the space on camera. She pointed at the east wall, the preserved brick wall, and said, "This is coming down. We need flow." Her contractor nodded. She pointed at the lighting grid anchored to the original ceiling joists and said, "All of this goes. It's too industrial." Her contractor wrote things on a clipboard. She did not pull permits. She did not contact the preservation office. She did not tell Terrence. I know this because Terrence called me. He'd been watching her Instagram. He told me, a little sheepishly, that one of his other tenants had flagged it to him. She's showing the interior on video, he said. Is she planning to modify the east wall? I believe so, I said. You might want to look at what she's been posting. 3 days later, Terrence filed a notice with the city's Office of Historic Preservation, not because I told him to, because he watched a video of a woman pointing at a protected structural element and saying, "This is coming down." The morning Meredith opened her practice. A soft launch, she'd called it, invitation only, a small gathering of potential clients and her own social following. I was parked 2 blocks away. I wasn't there to watch. I was there because my attorney, a woman named Philippa, who I'd worked with since I'd set up my business LLC, had advised me to be within a reasonable distance in case I was needed to confirm anything about the lease transfer in person. I had my laptop open on the passenger seat. I was editing a corporate shoot from the week before. At 10:20 in the morning, a city inspector's vehicle parked in front of the building. At 10:35, a second one arrived. I know what happened inside because Meredith live-streamed the entire thing. She hadn't turned off the stream when the inspector knocked. She was mid-sentence, telling her followers about her vision for somatic healing in a reclaimed industrial space, when the door opened and a man in a city vest walked in and asked to speak with the permit holder for the current renovation. The stream kept rolling for 6 more minutes before someone grabbed the phone. In those 6 minutes, I watched my brother try to explain that they hadn't technically started the major work yet, that the wall was still standing, that they were still in the planning phase. The inspector pointed to the lighting grid, half of which had already been disconnected and partially dismantled. He pointed to the east wall where the contractor had removed 2 sections of original brick for a sample that Meredith had wanted to bring to an interior designer. He photographed both. Meredith, on camera, said the alterations had been authorized by the previous tenant. The inspector asked for documentation. Philippa walked in at that moment. I texted her when I saw the second city vehicle, carrying the original lease assignment document and a printed copy of the Preservation Office's filing requirements. She introduced herself calmly and explained that the sublease agreement, executed 3 weeks earlier, made the incoming tenant fully responsible for all modifications made from the date of pre-tenancy access forward. She noted that pre-tenancy access had been granted in writing at the incoming tenant's request. She pulled up the assignment document on her tablet and displayed Section 4, indemnification, and the co-signatory clause of my brother's signature. Dex read his own name on that document with an expression I will never forget for as long as I live. My sister-in-law looked at him. He looked at the document. The inspector was still photographing the dismantled lighting grid. The violations were not catastrophic in a structural sense. The wall was still standing, the joists were intact, but they didn't need to be catastrophic to be expensive. Unauthorized removal of historically designated interior elements, even partial removal, carries a restoration requirement under the city's preservation code. They were looking at mandatory restoration of the brick sample removal, a stop work order on all planned renovations until proper permits were obtained and reviewed, and fines that Philippa told me, clinically over the phone later that afternoon, would likely land between $18,000 and $30,000, depending on how the inspector graded the scope. The landlord, separately, had grounds to terminate the lease assignment for breach of the alteration clause, which Meredith had agreed to in the building's standard tenant agreement when she accepted the keys. Terrence exercised that option 5 days later. He sent a certified letter. The space reverted to me, technically, but I had already decided I was done with Harrow Street. What I had not anticipated, and I want to be honest about this, because it matters, was my parents. I didn't call them, I didn't explain. I didn't send a message to the family group chat. I just let it sit. Dex called my father the same day the inspector came. I know this because my father called me that evening, and I could tell from his voice that he had already heard a version of the story in which I had engineered a trap for his son. He says you knew about the permit requirements, my father said. He says you let them go ahead knowing they'd get in trouble. I gave them an accurate lease document, I said. It described their obligations. He says you didn't warn them. I thought about that for a moment. Dad, I said. They tried to take my business. They walked into my studio and told me Meredith had decided to move in. They planned a renovation of a space they didn't own yet without pulling a single permit. I handed them a fair contract. What they did with it is on them. My father was quiet. Your brother is going to have to cover those fines somehow. I know, I said. You could have warned them. I thought about every time I had smoothed things over. Every time I had written a check or absorbed a slight or apologized for being difficult. Every conversation in which my being reasonable had been used as evidence that the conflict wasn't serious. I could have, I said. I chose not to. My father didn't have an answer for that. My mother called 2 days later. She did not ask how I was. She told me that Dex and Meredith were under a lot of stress. She told me that family was supposed to protect each other. She said, carefully, that she hoped I understood what I'd done. I do, I said. I understood it when I did it. She started to cry. I waited. Then I said, Mom, I have a shoot I need to get to. And I hung up. Meredith never got her wellness practice off the ground. Not at Harrow Street, anyway. The fines ate through the $8,000 they'd received from the assignment and then kept going. Dex had to take out a personal loan to cover the restoration costs for the brick removal. The stop work order made the space unusable during the permit process. And by the time Terrence terminated the assignment, they paid 2 months of rent on a studio they couldn't operate in. I found out later, through my cousin who stays in contact with both sides of my family, that my parents had quietly contributed to covering the fines. I don't know the exact number. I didn't ask. I signed a lease on a new space 6 weeks after leaving Harrow Street. Ground floor unit in a newer building, no historic preservation designation, concrete floors, high ceilings, better ventilation, 15% more square footage than Harrow Street for roughly the same monthly cost. I had the lighting infrastructure rebuilt from scratch, this time with the system designed around the specific dimensions of the new room. The first shoot I did there was for a regional hospitality brand I'd been trying to land for 2 years. They'd reached out because another photographer had referred them to me. The campaign ran in 4 markets. I didn't send a message to my brother or Meredith. I didn't post anything pointed on social media. I didn't write a long letter about what had happened. What I did was update my studio's website with a new address and a new portfolio page. I sent the link to my mailing list with a 1-line note, new space, same work. Thank you for being here. Then I stood in the middle of my new studio in the quiet before the first client arrived, and I pressed both palms flat against the concrete wall and I thought, this is mine, every inch of it. No one handed it to me. No one can hand it away. I still think about the look on Dex's face when Philippa put the document on the table. Not the anger, the confusion. Like he genuinely could not understand how something he decided was already his had turned into something that was costing him money. That expression told me everything I'd spent years refusing to see clearly. He hadn't been cruel on purpose. He'd just never been asked to account for anything, ever. So it hadn't occurred to him that this time would be different. That's the part people don't talk about when they talk about families like mine. It's not always calculated malice. Sometimes it's just a lifetime of being allowed to reach for things without checking whether they belong to you. What I had to figure out, sitting in that parking garage before I ever opened a legal template, was what kind of person I wanted to be in response to it. Not what would feel good in the moment, not what would make them hurt the way I was hurting. What was actually right and what was actually smart, and whether those two things could be the same thing at the same time. I think they can. I think that's the whole point. I didn't lie to Dex or Meredith. I gave them an accurate contract that described their actual obligations. The consequences they faced came entirely from choices they made after they signed it. Choices they made loudly, on camera, without checking a single permit requirement. I didn't engineer their failure. I just stopped engineering their escape from it. There's a difference, and I've sat with that difference long enough to be certain I'm on the right side of it. What surprised me most wasn't that the plan worked. It was how calm I felt while it was working. I thought I'd feel triumphant, or vindicated, or at least some version of satisfied. What I actually felt watching that inspector walk into the live stream was tired. Tired in the clean way, the way you feel after you finally finish carrying something heavy and set it down for good. For years, I had confused absorbing the impact with being a good person. I thought being reliable meant being available for whatever anyone decided to put on me. I had confused those things so thoroughly that when I finally stopped doing it, I had to work hard to convince myself I wasn't being selfish. The studio on Harrow Street was mine. Every hour of work that went into it was mine. Choosing not to hand it over wasn't selfishness. It was just the most basic kind of self-respect, and the fact that I'd had to argue myself into it says more about how I'd been conditioned than it does about who I actually am. The grit it took to sit in that hotel, in this version, that car, and not act on instinct, not escalate, not call and beg and plead and forgive before anything had even been resolved, that wasn't coldness. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Staying still when every part of you wants to move, thinking past the first feeling to the one underneath it. choosing a response that required patience over one that only required anger. I'm in my new studio now. The walls are mine, the work is mine. And for the first time in a long time, I am not managing anyone else's version of who I'm supposed to be. That's the only ending I ever actually wanted.